like 3 million. Now he's saying 10 to 12. That hotel's population raised to 16, and it could not increase that much of that.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the City Council study session for Tuesday, August 5th, 2025. We have one item on the agenda. It's a discussion regarding the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, Community Rating System and Flood Insurance. And we have Scott here from Public Works to talk about that with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to come here tonight and take a few minutes. This isn't a very long presentation, so I'm not going to take a lot of your time this evening. This is something that we're required to do. We'll go into that here in a little bit, but it is part of the community rating system that we're a part of. And it's not.
Might be a shorter presentation than you thought.
And we're done. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay, there's the mouse anyway.
All right, I've never had it not advance for me.
Hey, Bryce, you back there
Bryce?
available? Yeah, we need one of those lights in his office.
Oh,
There
there
goes.
goes now. We just decided to finally
Good job,
move
Mr.
when I hit
Rivera.
the same button for the 20th time. So to kind of start off with, as the mayor pointed out, this is part of the FEMA. So it's a requirement. We're part of the community rating system. We'll talk about that a little bit more here as we go. But we kind of need to start off with, first off, with what is a floodplain. When you look at a river system or a creek or a large channel, usually there's a large widened area around it so that when that water gets too high, when it starts getting to its flood stages, it has an area where it widens out. And that can range from, you look at the Canadian River, it's very wide. It's a mile or more wide in some areas, to Imhoff Creek in areas where it's literally just the width of the channel or barely more. So it's a really variable item. This is just kind of a picture here that kind of depicts that. You can see in that normal condition, you got the little river. It floods, the water spreads out because it needs more room to be able to move, to be able to collect that water. If anybody has questions or comments, feel free to reach out. So when we start talking about what a regulatory floodplain is, it's the land that is subject to 1% or greater chance of flooding any given year. That's figured out through mathematical modeling. That's how they came up with them initially. Now, of course, it's a lot more sophisticated. Back in the day, they literally kind of did some, numbers on an engineering pad and then went out and drew them on a topo map. Today, we have much more detailed modeling that we utilize to figure that out. But you'll also hear this 1% chance or greater chance of flooding called the 100-year flood or the 1% chance flood. They're really trying to quit using the 100-year flood because it can happen every year for 10 years. And then it may not happen for a lot of years. These areas, when they're identified and they're mapped out by FEMA, that's considered the Special Flood Hazard Area, or SFHA, as they like to call it. And here's a couple of photos and some areas where we see some frequent flooding throughout Norman there in the bottom. So just to kind of review for everybody, I think we've all seen this map before, but all those areas in blue are floodplains. You can see there's quite a bit of them. You've got the very large area starting over there on the west side or to the left, which is the 10 Mile Flats, which is a large flat area. We see a lot of flooding in that area. And then, of course, down there to the south of that is the Canadian River flood area. So that comes up into Norman, and many of our creeks that come through Norman actually combine with that. And that zone gets really hard to tell through there. And then you can't see them quite as well, but all the major creeks, Brookhaven, Merkel, Bishop, Imhoff, all of them have floodplains associated with them. And then there on the north side of town, that's the Little River, which has a very large floodplain. That's a very flat area that widens out quite a bit. And then you can see the other tributaries that feed into the Lake Thunderbird and then going out of Lake Thunderbird. And those are all of our primary flood areas that we have identified. So this kind of shows you what a floodplain may look like. This is kind of as you're looking down the channel. So you can see that normal channel in the middle, that's where the water would normally be. And then you've got that area, that dashed line is the base flood elevation. That's where they've calculated that water would rise to in that 1% chance flood. So that's where that water would get up to. But some of the areas that we really are mindful of are this floodway area in the middle. And that's basically the area that needs to be kept clear to allow the water to be able to move freely. That's where if we wind up with a lot of structures in there, we can wind up with a lot more flooding, a lot more damage being caused. So we actually have more strict rules for that floodway area. And then you've got that area out there on the edge, which we call the flood fringe. That's the area that the flooding can be a little more dependent in and be a little bit more variable. And then that total width all the way across is what we call the flood plain. So kind of a lot going in there, a lot of discussion, but it's kind of just simply a way to kind of break it down and kind of understand the individual pieces and parts as we're discussing them with regard to the floodplain regulations. So when we talk about floodplain management, a lot of people say, what does that really mean? Basically, this is what do we do as a community to reduce the risk of flooding? That could be trying to fix things from the past, looking at ways that we can improve areas that flood today, or what can we do to make sure that areas don't flood in the future. So that could be looking at past development, future development. So we do a lot of work throughout the year working on new developments or new projects that people are doing to make sure that they're not going to cause flooding in our flood areas and impact our floodways. So we have a lot of requirements. We have our zoning code, building codes impact this, and then we have floodplain ordinances. Our floodplain ordinances in Norman are actually part of the zoning code because that is considered a zoning district. So that's where they reside. But then in addition, we have FEMA that actually has set minimum floodplain management requirements. So they've got a certain amount of items that you have to fulfill that's our baseline. We actually exceed that, and that helps us, and we'll discuss that here in a moment. Norman participates in the National Flood Insurance Program, or NFIP. And this is a way that allows our citizens to be able to get cost-effective insurance for flooding. So without this, they'd have to go out on their own and find private, which is still an option, which many people can do. But this is a great program. We've been a part of it since I've been here. I've been here for 14 years, and we've been part of it that entire time. So some of the things that we talk about when we're talking about the floodplain, one of the things that we're primarily concerned with is putting fill in the floodplain. And typically we're talking about dirt, concrete, anything that reduces the water's ability to move or be stored. So if you look at that top picture there, that's what it would look like in its more natural state. And then that bottom picture there after development, they've come in and they put dirt or they put material in that floodplain. Well, you can imagine, kind of like a bathtub. If you put something large in that bathtub, you can't get as much water in the bathtub. So the same thing happens here. So now we've made that water is displaced. It has to go somewhere, which means that either somebody else is flooding, or we're making the flood waters higher, or we're having a negative impact. So one of the things that we're really conscious of and really watch is allowing fill in the floodplain. So typically, you'd never see anything quite this dramatic in Norman. This is a little bit of an extreme kind of a caricature almost of that. But when somebody does bring fill into the floodplain for their purpose, they have to do what we call compensatory storage. They have to remove that same amount from the floodplain so that the water still has a place to be held. So we have the same storage of water. So the water, there's no net change in the amount of water that can be held within that floodplain area. And that's probably one of the things that we deal with the most as we're dealing with our floodplain permitting and new development in and around our floodplains, is making sure that we keep that balance correct so we don't have any problems. So we kind of have already mentioned the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program. This was created in 1968, so it's been around for a long time. And it's got a kind of two purposes here. One is to mitigate future flood losses through sound community enforced building and zoning ordinances. So that's where they've got a minimum set of standards that we have to adhere to to make sure that we can be a part of the program and participate. But then also it provides access to affordable federally backed flood insurance protection for property owners. So, back at that time, 1968, flood insurance was a little bit harder to get, and people needed a way to be able to be insured against flood and flood damage. So that's where this came through and why NFIP was completed at that time and put into effect. One thing I do want to say is that this flood insurance is only for structures and contents of those structures. So when we're talking about this, we're always going to be talking about structures within the NFIP program. So we also talk about the CRS. That's the Community Rating System. This is a program within the NFIP, and it's a really interesting program. Their goals are to reduce and to avoid flood damage to insurable property and strengthen and support insurance aspects of the NFIP. So they're kind of another program within it to help make it stronger, and then also to foster comprehensive floodplain management. So to kind of break that down and make a little bit more sense. So we are members of the CRS. You do not have to be a part of it if you're a part of the NFIP, but it is encouraged. There's very few communities in Oklahoma that actually participate in the CRS. But the incentive to us is that as we do it, we can offer reduced insurance rates to our citizens who utilize the NFIP program. And I'll show you what those rates look like here in just a second. But basically to do that, we have to go through the system, and I'll show you the point system here in a second. It's pretty long and convoluted, but basically we go through and we have to submit all of our materials. That's audited and reviewed, and then they come back and they check us, and we just went through part of that audit system to make sure that we're actually meeting everything. And that number, the class that we fit in can change. So we're currently a class 6 community. There's 10 classes. Tulsa is the only number 1 in the state, and they've only recently gotten there in the past couple of years. It takes a lot of time and a lot of money to get there. There's a lot of things you have to do. Tulsa had some very severe flooding in the past, a lot of loss of life, so it was worth it to their community to go to that level. So as a class 6 community, we've highlighted it there in red. You can see, so if you're getting insurance through NFIP and you're in a floodplain, you would get a 20% discount on your insurance. And if you choose to participate in the program and you're out of the floodplain, you would get a 10% discount on those premiums. So every little bit helps, and we certainly like to do what we can to help our citizens with that. So when we start talking about how we're ranked in the CRS program, there's 19 creditable activities. There are 4 categories. You can see the categories listed there. I think it makes a little more sense to look at it on this. You can see that 300 is public information activities. So there's a lot of things that we fit into there. Mapping and regulations, obviously keeping up with current maps, doing new mapping as necessary. You'll see there that 430 come almost right in the middle, higher regulatory standards. We have higher regulatory standards than the national standard. We have a 2-foot elevation above the base flood elevation instead of 1 foot. So we get credit for that in this system. It also gives us more of a margin of protection for our citizens and for the structures that they put there. Then we have flood damage reduction activities. Acquisition and relocation. Council has allowed us in the past few years to purchase 2 properties on Lahoma, and by doing so, we get points in this because we removed those structures from the floodplain and we've taken it back to a natural area, and those are deed restricted to where you cannot build on those properties now. So we get some credit for that. And then also warning and response. This is an area, I don't know, most of you heard that we had been awarded a grant and it wound up not getting final award, and we kind of portrayed as lost it. We never had the money, but we never got the final award. To do a flood warning system, that would have given us more points in this category to help us get our rating higher. I don't know that it would have been enough to get us to a class 5, but it could have been. We just don't know where we would have ranked with that. So to kind of make it even simpler, So activity 370 was flood insurance promotion. There's a possible 110 points in there. There's 4 different elements that we have to meet. One of them is flood insurance coverage assessment, and it requires a review of flood insurance coverage in Norman be presented to City Council, like right now. That's what we're doing. We're getting 15 points on our CRS sitting here right now. So to kind of break that down, so 7% of all of the buildings in a flood hazard area, there's 7% of them have flood insurance. There's 863 different structures. 64 of them have insurance. 7%. That's a really low number. To be honest, that's kind of concerning to me as the floodplain administrator. And we have what we call 17 repetitive loss properties. That's 17 properties that have filed repetitively over time on that same property. And we've got those mapped. Those are the areas that we always drive to as soon as it starts flooding and see if those homes are having, and several of them are on Lahoma. And so, yeah, those are the people that we actually spend a lot of time concerned with. And between those, there's been 167 paid claims. Just kind of a little bit of data here. So this first table is policies by occupancy, and this data is from 2020. So single family in 2020, there were 426 policies, about $116 million there in insurance in force, and the average coverage there was $273,000. You can see for 2 to 4 family occupancy, there were 17. Those numbers go down quite a bit. And then all other residential, there were 12 policies, and there were 34 non-residential, so commercial, industrial. You can see that the total was 489 different policies, totaling premiums of over $340,000. The insurance in force was over $136 million, dollars, and the average coverage was $280,000 roughly. So we're going to fast forward to 225. It's been a long day. I really do apologize. To 2025. So keep that 489 number in mind. Today we're down to 251. So in 5 years, we've gone almost in half in the number of policies that are held within the city of Norman. Single family went from 426 to 224. So we saw a huge reduction there. You can see the premiums dropped quite a bit. Half of the insurance in force, which you would expect, but the average coverage increased, which over time we see property values increase. That's not a real surprising item there. And you can see similarly all the others dropped, but the total average coverage rose to $316,000. So it went up quite a bit in the average coverage.
So that's people not renewing, or they can't get it, or what?
And we don't have that data for sure. We don't have a definite answer to that. Obviously, we've gone through economic times since 2020 to 2025 have changed a little bit. It could just be a matter of people not wanting to be spending that money. That's a place where they feel that they can save some money and do other things with that money. Also, it might be that some of those homes, a lot of times, if you've purchased a property that has the structures in the floodplain, your mortgage holder will usually require that you have flood insurance. So it could be that some of the houses that had flood insurance to cover their mortgage requirements, they may have completed their mortgage, or maybe the mortgage holder just isn't checking anymore. I don't know for certain. But there's a lot of reasons that could have occurred, but we do not have any real data to tell us exactly why at this time. So this is kind of another way to break it down. This is looking at it by zone. I want to simplify this. Let's talk about zone A, which is the top 4 lines, and zone X, which is the last 2 lines. I don't know why we don't really use zone AO and AH anymore. Those are kind of historical, and B and C really only apply to coastal regions. So it's just a lot of clutter on here for me. So if you look at it back in 2020, we had 156 policies in zone A. And then interestingly, most of our policies were preferred policies in non-flood areas. Zone X is non-flood. That's outside the 100-year flood. So we had 311 policies outside of that area. Kind of an interesting number. That's really high. It means there were a lot of people that were concerned about localized flooding or other items. And I think this may be where we see some of the reduction, and some of those people chose not to continue. The rest of the numbers look very similar. But again, when we fast forward to 2025, that changes to 251, and now we're down to 64 policies in Zone A and 187 in the Zone X. The other thing that changed there is we had 311 preferred policies, and now you can see there aren't any. We've been talking about what we think happened there. Basically, they kind of have been getting away with the preferred policy and going to what they're calling a risk-based or an actuarial assessment. So if you're 6 inches above the floodplain, your rate's going to be higher than if you're 3 foot above the floodplain. If you're 4 foot below the floodplain, you're paying a lot more money because you're going to have a lot more claims for a lot more money. So that's what we think has happened here, is that this is just a change going from those preferred rates to this new way that they're calculating the rates. But anyways, again, just showing that it went in half. Just kind of interesting that we kind of see it, that's that stark of a difference. So since 2020, we have tried to raise people's awareness of the flood insurance program. We've increased the direct mailings every year as part of the NFIP. We do have to send out letters to all those property owners with structures within the floodplain. We do that. We don't miss that. We get it every year. We also try to get more direct contact. We have also done mail outs and utility bills. We go to community events when we have anything like the Neighborhood Alliance meetings. We're there with the floodplain information. So we're trying to get it out there as often and as completely as we can to try to help our citizens. We've also put things out on social media, the website, and other areas. So we're not sitting still. We're trying to do more and trying to reach more of our citizens and assist them with this item. Another reason for the reduction is we think that a lot of people may have gone from using the National Flood Insurance Program to private insurance. I think that a lot of insurance carriers have gotten a little more active in trying to get those, especially with as you're getting a new mortgage, they're able to help you more. So I think that's been a change, maybe another reason for the reduction. So the CRS class change, when are they made? So if we did something that was just really big and that we thought would get us the points, we could request that and have them look at it until it gives us a determination. Otherwise, they do the CRS cycle verification visit. We're in the middle of that right now. They were here last month. They were here for about a day, went through a lot of our materials. We're providing some additional information now. That's due the middle of this month, and then we'll see where we fall. We expect to stay a 6. We'd love to go to a 5, but we don't think we got enough points without that flood warning to make it. But you have to prove, you can't just tell them you're doing it. You have to show them. You have to give them actual documentation, and they actually do somebody review that directly. So again, we're class 6. Basically, some of the things that we've done, a lot of it is the standards that we've set being higher. I also think the fact, I think we're one of the few communities, we actually have a floodplain permit committee. That committee is 5 staff members and 2 citizen members, and they actually get a staff report, much like you do at a council meeting. And then we discuss it, we allow public input, and then we actually make a determination on that. So we actually go a little above. I think a lot of communities literally just do it by an administrative stamp. You know, it's more administrative. I think it's something that makes us unique, and I think it does give a better end result to making sure that we're meeting it. So that's one of the other items that we do differently that puts us above the NFIP. The building code effectiveness grading schedule, we do really well on that. We meet all the requirements or exceed all the requirements. So we never really get dinged for anything. We need to do more to get higher. So again, we're going to go back to that activity 370, which is why we're here tonight. So, you know, we can determine if any possible future actions can be taken. And also, we will be reassessing flood insurance coverage prior to the next cycle visit and seeing if we've had another increase or decrease in that since that time. I know that was probably one of the driest ever presentations you've had to sit through. I do appreciate your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Pun intended. First question is, was that pun intended or?
I wish I was that bright tonight, but no, it was actually just worked out well.
So, we're a class 6 community. Tulsa's a class 1. Do we have a report to show? I know we have peer cities and other categories. Can we see what some of our other peer cities rank in this?
I can get that.
regard?
We have the ranking for all the communities that do that within the state of Oklahoma, and I can get that to you, and we'll get that. I'll get that to the city clerk's office, and we'll get that to you.
If we've, we're class 6 and Tulsa's class 1. If a resident has to get flood insurance in Tulsa, is it cheaper for a class 1 resident?
Yeah, so they get a 45% reduction in the premiums, where we get a
Wow.
20% reduction in the premiums.
And that's stepped by class 2. Like class 5 is 30 and.
That
Yeah.
one slide.
Yeah, we got a slide.
There.
So you can
Gotcha,
see,
okay, yeah.
so, class 5, basically you get 5% for each class. Starting at 10, you get 5% reduction
Gotcha.
until you get down, and then 45% is the maximum reduction.
Cool, okay. And so 863 properties in our area. Do we have a list of those properties? Would it?
We do, because we actually have to mail out letters to those.
Would it be?
And that, I think that's structures. I'd have to double check that number.
Would it be? Yeah, I guess it would be structures. If it's just dirt, then nobody
Right.
cares. Would it be worth the exercise to see what of those properties still have a mortgage on them, or?
So I think I see opportunities. We work mightily kind of in the same type of push on the ISO side for the fire department to help you get the most cost-effective fire insurance. If we kind of replicate that effort on the flood insurance for those 800 plus properties, it's some investment on the capital side over time. We have really good data, which got us this far through GIS. And I think from that mailing list, I don't know if there's anything at the assessors there. I'll bet you there is. If you have a mortgage, you've got a deed recorded.
Mortgages are public record. It's
Yep,
not on
so-
the assessor, but it would be on the county clerk.
The data's out there. I bet you we could match it just with a yes or no. Mortgage yes, mortgage no. I bet we could do that.
I mean, that would be, not that we need to like go tell the banks or anything from a banker, I'm saying that. But, there might be some opportunity there to increase that coverage. I feel like I had one more, but if I remember it, it'll come back to me.
Okay, any other questions?
And I would just like to add, so in our floodway, we have very strict rules here. Basically, we are no build in the floodway. But we have acknowledged that if you have a structure or a home in the floodway and something happens to it, needs to be reconstructed, or you want to improve it, we can't really deny that. So what we do in those cases is we allow them the footprint. I don't want to use grandfathered, but that's kind of the word we internally use, so that we don't tell someone they can't keep the improvements they have on a property. But basically, the floodway, we consider a no-build zone.
And even as vast as this set of circumstances exists nationwide, we've had FEMA inspectors show up and they look at all the permits we've issued, and if they see a permit issued in the floodplain floodway, they go out and put eyes on it. And we had a permit requested to build an outhouse in a golf course in the floodway, and the permit said you have to build it
2 foot above.
2 feet above this line, this elevation above sea level. Well, the contractor went up there and poured the slab kind of at grade, and it got built too low. And FEMA shows up knocking on the door saying, hey, you guys, we got to come up with a different solution. You cannot have that improvement there. And we thought, wow, they're really putting eyes on it. We were able to achieve a solution, and the solution was they're going to cut a hole in the bottom of the structure on this side where the water would come in, and cut a hole in the bottom of the structure on the other side where the water will go out. The only thing in there is a toilet and a sink. And FEMA said, We're okay with that.
All of the electrical, any electrical that was required was
Was
above the flood
well
level,
above.
and so we were able to do that in that situation.
There are eyes on the most minuscule build. If you build it in that part of the map.
They
they're
did
gonna put
aerial
eyes on it.
photos and found a barn that had been built partially within the floodway and completely in the floodplain that you couldn't see from the roadway. And they asked us, where's the permit for this? And we went, for what? But that was the previous cycle, not this cycle, but they can get pretty detailed.
Yes, Councilor Rivera.
So, what is that maximum points earned? Is that us or just in general?
So that's what is the maximum amount of points you could get.
No, I see the maximum points earned. So like, if you look at 340 hazard disclosure, max possible is 80, max points earned 62. Who is that? Like the general?
Yeah, so the max points that they have awarded whenever they did this, that was the highest number of points they awarded in that.
Is
So these aren't our scores.
No, these aren't our scores.
Yeah, I was curious what ours were because it was like, oh, well, if you wanted us to point to like where to do a little more work, it'd be helpful to know if where we're standing at some of these.
And we do have those numbers, and when we start looking at what do we think we can do as a community to raise us to another class, we go through and we do that exercise internally.
Where could we pick up points?
You know, it's kind of that point where I'd have to really get with Jason Murphy. He spends more time in the CRS program than I do. So for me to give the exact, we can do it here or there. The flood warning was a big one. We could have gotten a lot of points.
I just wonder about the hazard disclosure because I think of spots in Ward 4 where people think they can buy property, but really it's always been flooded and they'll never build in it. What does hazard disclosure mean in this?
So I believe in this case, and again, I haven't looked at the specific details in the CRS program on that. I think that's letting the community know about those areas. I think that's the letters that we send out
Okay.
is probably part of that. I'd have to look at what else exactly. There's probably 4 or 5 or 6 things under that one individual item.
Yeah, I
So-
wonder a little bit about, well, I'm not a realtor, but just like when you're selling a house that you know, let's just say Oklahoma, is gonna flood a lot. Like what do you tell someone when they're interested in that property and think it's gonna be?
He doesn't say nothing at all.
Yeah.
Supposed to disclose it.
So is there like a regulatory mechanism?
If it's on the documents.
And then usually the banker gets blamed for telling them.
You
and
killed my
actually-
deal.
And actually making them get it.
Okay. Yeah, just kind of curious about how these get applied and where we could pick up points.
So if
Yeah,
with council's interest in the subject, even during our budget development process, because we'd applied for a grant for the flood warning system, that doesn't mean we couldn't go potentially tackle that on our own, and we could look at steps to get to the implementation of such a flood warning system and pick up those points. We're always gonna go look for the grant, but just because we didn't get the grant doesn't mean it's off limits. We would just have to account for installing that out of our capital budget. Absolutely happy to take a peek at those options for council to consider. Council states a goal, we wanna go from a 6 to a 5. Guys, go make that happen.
Is there any way we
Where
could
is
see if that flood warning would have been granted and approved? Is there any way that we could get somebody to tell us if that would have been enough to bump us to 5?
what we'll do, so right now we're waiting to see what points they actually award us, because they're calculating those and some of our responses. So we're probably a little ways away from knowing where we're actually at today. And then with that, we know what we think we would have gotten on the flood warning system, but we don't know what they would have awarded.
Yeah.
And it's, federal government, they're not real forthcoming in giving you data they don't have to. But we could certainly, we will look at that. And like I said, it's something that we look at every time that comes up. Or we're always looking, is there someplace where we can find, if we need 200 points, is there someplace we can squeak 210 points? And we do look at that routinely, and we keep up with it quite a bit.
Also just noticing stormwater management is 450, so if we actually created like stormwater utility fee and started fixing things, that would up our points.
Yeah, and again, I have to look at what those exactly, what categories they put underneath there, because it's, some of them's a little awkward, but, you know.
Yeah.
Sorry. What would a flood warning system look like as far as, I mean, is the text messages that go out from ECOC?
So in our case, what it would be is, so right now, we start getting a heavy rain, and we know that there's big rain coming, we know big rain's happened. We start watching some of our known areas. We do have a few gauging stations that are in place for our Lake Thunderbird total maximum daily load, and they give us stream elevation level. So we start watching those. And from our collective experience, we know that when gauge X gets to 100, that we're gonna start seeing flooding in these areas. And then we go, hey crews, go out and start checking those areas. PD, can you check these? And we start going out and checking those areas. With the flood warning system, it would be more automated. Instead of Jason sitting at home watching stream gauges on his computer and calling in when we think that we're starting to get to a critical mass, it would be, the stream gauges would be monitored, and they would actually send an alert that could be being monitored at the ECOC. And it would flash to red, and that would mean we're going to that flooding is at that imminent stage at that location, or that location's downstream of that. So it would give us an opportunity to be able to be more proactive instead of reactive in those instances. You can go beyond that. You can go, and then they can send out the alerts at that point. You can have more elaborate systems that actually will drop gates across the roadway to stop people on the roadway. Instead of us going out and setting up barricades and taking them down, you can also have flashing lights, caution, this area is flooding. I've seen those in Dallas, in deep metro area, where they had that, where it was just flashing lights saying, road subject to flooding, and you got flashing hazard lights going. So you can add to it, you can expand it. There's a lot of opportunities and different ways to handle that. But what we're looking at right now would just be something that could be monitored from the ECOC during emergencies, during flooding activities and heavy rains, to where we wouldn't have to have a breakdown in
So
a
this
human
is
watching.
upgraded software that watches itself, basically.
Yeah, it's a little more, you got to put some more stuff into the stream gauge, because you actually have to have it set up to right now it just sends to one point, so that's into another point. And again, Jason's the one that set all this up and understands it. I apologize, Jason is out ill today, so I'm I'm your stand-in. But he understands all that, and he was the one that went through, and we actually had a study done. And that study actually was the one that's recommending what that equipment would look like and how we'd move forward with that system. Of course, you imagine a lot of it is along the Little River Corridor, the Lahoma, Main Street, up here at Dawes, you go on over, and then parts of West Norman and the 10 Mile Flats. Those are kind of really your main over and over flooding areas. There's also some areas out by the lake that flood really bad too. And I don't think we were going to hit everywhere, but I think it was going to be a start on getting a system in place that we could expand upon and build upon in the future.
So, I have a question. When you say that now you have a manual monitoring process, somebody sees the gauges, gets to a certain level, and then they start making calls and say, would this system improve the efficiency of that process?
Yes.
Meaning they would know where to go, wouldn't need a
There would be
intermediary or
alerts
middleman,
sent to the ECOC, to where it would
and then they can
be
dispatch.
whoever's there would be able to monitor. They would be able to see it and be able to address it quicker.
And that would take out the need for you to send your employees out to those locations to gauge what the situation is?
Well, right now we're doing it on computer. We still send somebody out because we still have to set the road barricades out
Right.
there. And a lot of times, to be honest, PD and fire are actually out there. They have more boots on the ground than we do, and they will call in and say, we're starting to see flooding at 12th and Franklin. And then we mobilize crews to go set barricades. So we'd still be mobilizing, but at least we'd be able to we wouldn't have to be sending people in those areas to double check and let us know where we're at. It would be a more efficient process.
Any final comments, questions from council for Scott.
Don't flood him all at once.
Okay. Yeah, flooding will continue to be an issue in Norman, as we know. And hopefully we can continue to make improvements. And I think if more of our residents saw those types of savings on insurance are out there, if we could get there, and how it's becoming harder and more expensive to get homeowners and flood insurance for people, especially in Oklahoma, California, and Florida, seem to be the three hardest states to find and to get insurance, or it's real expensive right now. So anything we can do to help bring that down, I think our residents would appreciate.